Hey guys, welcome back to this Flutter game development series where we are making Spacescape, a 2D top-down space shooter using the Flame engine. In the last video, we added support for storing player data persistently using Hive. This means now players can exit the game anytime without losing earned money and unlock spaceships. So in this video, I'm going to add some sound effects and background music to this game. For this, I'll be using the Flame audio package. And as we are using the latest pre-release version of Flame, I'll have to use the latest pre-release version of Flame audio as well. So I'll copy this dependency and add it to the pub/spec file. Flame audio internally depends on audio player package, and for some reason, when I try to build this project with the latest Flame audio package, it fails. The only way to fix this is to upgrade the Kotlin version in project level Gradle file. So I'll open the build.gradle file located inside Android directory and change this Kotlin version from 1.3.5 to 1.5.21. This should save us from the build issue. Next, to add sound effects and background music, we'll first need some audio assets. To save some time, I have already downloaded and added 4 audio files in the assets/audio directory. I'll quickly play each one of these and explain which asset will be used for what. So this last one, called Power Up, will be played when any power up gets activated. Then this Laser Small will be used for bullet fire sound. Next, Laser 1 will be played when an enemy gets destroyed. And finally, this Space Invaders will be used as the main background music. All these assets are free for use, and links to all of them are in the description as well as in the GitHub repository of this project. So feel free to use these same assets, or if you want, you can use your own assets. Okay, now that I have got all the required assets, let's start writing some code. So the first thing that I want to implement is a way to allow players to turn sound effects and background music on or off. And just like player data, this setting should also be stored persistently to the disk. So to do this, I'll first create a new file called settings.dart under models directory. As the app will have to react when some settings are changed, I'll extend this class from change_notifier. And to be able to save settings to Hive by calling the save method, I'll add the Hive object mix into this class. Next, I'll annotate this class with Hive type and type ID as 2. Inside this class, first I'll add a private boolean data member called sfx. This will control if sound effects should be played or not. I'll set its initial value to false. Then to get value of this member from outside the class, I'll add a getter called soundEffects. Next, I'll add a setter for this member which will take a boolean value as input and set it as sfx. And after this, I'll call notify listeners so that rest of the app knows that settings have changed. Also, this needs to be saved in Hive, so I'll call the save method at the end. As this field needs to be saved in Hive, I'll mark it as a Hive field with ID as 0. Next, we also need a boolean field to control the background music. So let's duplicate this code, change Hive field ID to 1, field name to BGM, and name of setter and getter to background music. Using this field, we can decide if background music should be played or not. Next, let's add a constructor for this class, which will initialize sfx and BGM with 2 optional parameters with default values as false. And that is it. This completes the definition for settings class. Now, to auto-generate the settings adapter class, I'll add settings.g.dart as part of this file. Okay, so now we can run the build runner command to generate this file. We'll just have to pass in the flag delete conflicting outputs so that the existing generated files get replaced with the new ones. And once this completes, we should get settings.g.dart file containing the settings adapter class. So now, let's go to the init Hive function in main.dart file and register this newly created settings adapter. Next, similar to this getPlayerData function, we'll also have to create a function to get settings from Hive. So I'll just duplicate this whole function and rename it to getSettings. we can remove all these comments for now. Let's also change the return type of this function to future of settings. Then next, we have this call to init hive, which is also done in getPlayerData. So to avoid calling this multiple times, I'll remove it from both these functions and add it back in the main function. This means now main function will have to be marked as async. And while we are here, let's add await before flame.device.fullscreen because it also returns a future. Now back in get settings, hive.openBox will now open a box of settings type. The name of this box will have to be changed to something else. But instead of hard coding some string for box and key inside this box, let's go to the settings class and add two static const strings. This will make reusing the strings much easier without having to worry about making spelling mistakes. I'll do a similar thing in PlayerData class too. Now back in get settings, I can use settings.settingsBox and settings key as input to open box, box.get and box.put calls. I'll do the same thing in getPlayerData too. Okay, so again in get settings, I'll rename this PlayerData to settings. Then if settings turn out to be null, I'll put a default settings object in settings box with sound effects and background music as true. This completes the get settings function. Next, we'll have to add one more future provider for reading settings in this run app. And to make the code a little easier to maintain, I'll first wrap this future provider in a multi-provider. Multi-provider needs a list of providers. So the first provider in this list will be the same future provider of PlayerData. We just need to provide the create and init data here. Then next, I'll duplicate this future provider and change PlayerData to settings. This means in create function, we'll have to call getSettings instead of getPlayerData. And initial data will be an object of settings with sound effects and background music off. Next, we want to read and expose both PlayerData and settings to downstream widgets as change notifiers. And to do that, I'll use the builder property of this multi-provider. This needs a function which takes a context and a child as input and returns a widget. So for exposing PlayerData as change notifier, we already have the code inside builder of next future provider. I'll just cut that code and paste it inside builder of multi-provider. Now we don't actually need this next future provider, but we need the material app specified as child of it. I'll cut this material app and add it as the direct child of multi-provider. This means we now have a multi-provider which contains two future providers, one for PlayerData and the other one for settings. Then we have a builder function which exposes PlayerData created by future provider as a change notifier to the whole material app. Now similar to this, we also have to expose settings as a change notifier here. So I'll repeat the same steps again and add a multi-provider here too. The providers list of this multi-provider will just contain two change notifier providers for PlayerData and settings. And child property for this inner multi-provider will be the same child widget that we get as input to current builder function. And that is it. Now we should be able to read stored settings from Hive. Next, let's add the settings menu to allow players to change these settings. For that, I'll create a new file called settings_menu.dat under the screens folder. This file will contain a class extending stateless widget called settings menu. And to save some time, I'll copy the whole scaffold from main menu.dat to build method of settings menu. So here, this title text will be settings instead of Spacescape. Next, instead of this last option button, we need a back button which will just pop current settings menu and go back to previous page. For that, I'll copy the code from select spaceship class and replace this option button with it. And here, instead of push replacement, we just need to call pop method on navigator. Next, above this back button, I want to display two switch list tiles for sound effects and background music. But first, let's remove this play button. And in main menu.dat, let's complete this long-standing to do and add code to navigate to settings menu. Now back in settings menu, in between the title and back button, let's add a switch list style. This needs a boolean value as input and an onChanged callback. Now to provide a value to this switch list style, we need to get it from current settings. And to do that, I'll first wrap this switch list style inside a selector. The selector will listen to settings and will extract a boolean value from the settings. Each selector needs two callback functions. First is a builder function which builds and returns a widget, and next is a selector function which extracts a specific value from the object being listened to. So in this case, selector will be a function which receives a build context and an object of settings as input. From this function, I'll just return settings.soundEffects. Next, this builder function will receive a build context, a boolean value returned by selector, and an optional child widget. And now, instead of this child property, I'll return switch list style from within this builder. Next, in this onChanged callback, I'll use provider.off method with listen property as false to get current settings and change the value of sound effects to the new value. And finally, to tell users that this switch list style controls sound effects, I'll add a text widget as title property to this switch list style. Now let's duplicate this whole selector and make necessary changes so that it controls the background music. Okay, so now let's build and run this code to see how it looks. And as you can see, we can now go to the settings menu where we have these two toggles. So to test if settings are getting stored correctly, I'll switch off both these toggles and then hot restart the app. Now let's go back to the settings menu, and yes, both the toggles have maintained their state. This means settings are getting correctly stored in Hive. Okay, so now that we can store and read settings from Hive, let's move on to actually playing sound effects and background music in game. And there are multiple ways of doing this. The most easiest way to play audio is to directly call methods from Flame Audio class from anywhere in the app. I personally don't like that much. So instead, I will create a new Flame component which will be responsible for playing all the game audio. First, let's add a new file under game directory called audioplayerComponent.dart. Inside this file, I'll create audioplayerComponent class which will extend Flame's component class. Next, to perform some initializations and load all the required audio assets, I'll override the onload method in this class. Inside this onload, first I'll call flameaudio.bgm.initialize. This call makes sure that Flame Audio can automatically pause and resume background music when our game is not active. Next, similar to image assets, we'll also have to cache all the required audio assets using flameaudio.audiocache.loadAll. Here, I'll pass in names of all the audio assets and then await for it to complete. Next, I'll quickly add three methods: playBGM, playSFX, and stopBGM. Out of these three, playSFX and playBGM will need a file name as input. The primary purpose of these three methods will be to just call the corresponding methods from Flame Audio and forward the file name. Like playBGM will call play method of flameaudio.bgm, playSFX will call play method of Flame Audio, and stopBGM will call stop method of flameaudio.bgm. Now, this definition will work for most part. But in case if a player has turned off toggles for sound effects and background music from settings menu, we should not play any audio. So I would like to have that logic baked right inside these methods so that we can call these methods without having to worry about settings. And to do that, first I'll add the hasGameRef mixin to this class. We need this because we want to access current settings using provider.off method, and this method needs a build context which will be available to the GameRef. So in the playBGM method, I'll first check if GameRef.buildContext is valid or not, and move this Flame Audio call inside this check. Next, if the build context is valid, I'll get current settings by calling provider.off method with gameref.buildContext as input and listen property set to false. Once we get current settings, I'll access the background music getter and put this whole line inside a if check. And finally, I'll move this flame audio call inside this inner if check. This means play BGM will actually play given audio file only if background music toggle is on. I'll do the same thing for play SFX. The only difference is this will check for sound effects instead of background music. And that is it. We don't need to perform any checking in stop BGM as it does not actually play anything. Now that we have this audio player component, next step is to add it to our game. For that, let's go to the game.dart file. Here, first let's add a new late field of type audio player component. Then similar to rest of the components of this class, in the onload method I'll create a new audio player component, store it in this field variable and then add it to our game. Next, to start the background music as soon as the game starts, in the onAttach method, I'll call play BGM on audio player component with correct file name as input. And opposite to this, when the game is removed from the widget tree, we'll have to stop the background music. For that, I'll override onDetach method and call audio player component.stopBGM inside it. This takes care of background music. Next, let's see how to add sound effects. So for the bullet fire sound, I'll go to the joystick action method of player class. Here, after we add a bullet to the game world, I'll add a new command for audio player component. In the action callback of this command, I'll call play SFX method on audio player component with the laser small sound effect. Similarly, for enemy destroy sound, I'll go to the destroy method of enemy class. Here, after we register this enemy to get removed from the game world, I'll add a new command for audio player component which plays the laser 1 effect. And finally, for the power up activation effect, I'll go to the onCollision method of power up class. Here, before we call the onActivated method, I'll again register a command for audio player component which will play power up effect. And that is it. Now we should be able to hear background music as well as sound effects in this game. So let's build and test this. First, let's go to the settings menu and make sure that both these toggles are on. Okay, and now let's start the game. Okay, so that works just fine. Now let's try to turn off background music from settings and start the game again. And now the background music has stopped. We can only hear the sound effects. Let's quickly also check if it works the other way around. So this time I'll turn off sound effects and turn on background music. Okay, and that also works fine. So that was all for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. If you did, do hit that like button and maybe consider subscribing for more such content. I hope to see you in the next one.